Welcome to today's broadcast of North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of NIC television students, and your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Today it's my very special privilege to welcome to our program Bishop Melvin Talbert. He is a bishop for the United Methodist Church, and he has been on our campus today to speak at the annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. We had almost a full house for his keynote address today, and we were delighted. As to background, our distinguished guest today has a number of special awards that I will only mention a couple. He received the Special Achievement Award from the National Association of Black Businesswomen in 1971. He also has an honorary Doctor of Divinity from Houston Tilston College that he received in 1972. There's numerous awards that he's received. As to background, he is in the field of theology, as I've indicated, and he has been assigned as the resident bishop of the Seattle Episcopal area, comprising the Pacific Northwest Annual Conference, where he serves in this religious capacity. He also serves as a trustee on 3 different college boards of trustees. Those include Gammon Theological Seminary of Atlanta, Georgia, also the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington, and the School of Theology at Claremont, California. Bishop Talbert, you have been inspiring today with your address about Dr. King and human rights, and we look forward to sharing some of those same ideas and comments with our audience by television. Welcome to our program.
Thank you. It's good being here.
Also welcome to the panel to question our distinguished guest today, regular panelist Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in Coeur d'Alene. Also we have Father Bill Wasmuth, who is the president of the Kootenai County Task Force on Human Relations, and Mr. Steve Schenck, who is director of informational services at North Idaho College. And I shall invite Janelle Burke to commence the questioning.
Well, Bishop Talbot, so much has happened in our lifetime with regard to the whole field of civil rights. Can you tell us, to set the stage for our viewers, what some of the most significant historical events have been within the past few years? And then a second part to that question, what do you consider to be the present status of civil rights in America today?
Well, obviously, in my lifetime, the most significant thing that happened in the field of civil rights happened during the life of the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Civil rights leaders prior to his coming attempted to get legislation passed for open housing and getting rid of segregated facilities and all of that. But it took his leadership and actually his death to get some of this passed in the country. So during his lifetime, he set the stage, but in the actuality of his death, we were able to reap the benefits of it. So we have legislation on the books now, making it possible for all citizens in this nation to have equal protection under law, irrespective of their race. Right now, the real issue before us is still equality. We have it on the books, but we don't have it in reality. All persons of all races and of all sexes need opportunities for education, equal opportunities for education. They need equal opportunity for jobs. That's sorely needed now. We talk about that, but it isn't real. And when we look at the places where people are being educated, we still don't find enough, at least higher education, we don't find enough of the people of color being educated in our institutions. When we look in the society where employment is taking place, we find that they are still lacking in the number of ethnic minorities. They're still lacking in the number of women. So instead of pulling back on affirmative action in these areas, I think we need to step that up so that equality and justice will prevail for all persons in our day.
Father Bill.
You were very gracious to come to Coeur d'Alene and to support us in our Martin Luther King Day celebration today by your presence and by your words, and I appreciate that very much. I wondered if you would just comment for a moment on the importance of the celebration of this day as you see it from your perspective of being a bishop of the Methodist Church in the Northwest. What special meaning might the celebration of Martin Luther King Day have for us in Washington and Northern Idaho?
I think Martin Luther King's dream has theological and philosophical concepts that we ought to subscribe to as human beings and as religious people. Theological, we are all created in the image of God. That's very important for us to recognize, that God created us, and God, as some people have said, God don't create no junk, you know. Mm-hmm. We're all equal, and in the eyes of God, we are all important, we have significance, and we have worth. And that's what Martin was saying to us, you know, we are important, we are significant, and we have worth. Philosophically, Martin was saying to us, if we are to be free as people, and if we are to survive as a human race, those rights must be guaranteed to each of us. And then he said, no one is free unless all is free. And I think that's important for us to recognize. If I'm the one that has the upsmanship on somebody or having the upper side, I'm really not free, because it takes a kind of captivity for me to be able to hold another in captivity. But when one is freed from oppression, the ones who are the oppressors are likewise free in a relationship where we don't have to make false premises of why I am where I am. You know, I am where I am because I am who I am, a human being created in the image of God, not because my color of skin is different from yours. And I think that's important for us to remember.
Steve Sheen.
Bishop Talbert, Sam Parker, a young black North Idaho College student, in his remarks today, urged the people in the audience at the Martin Luther King Day celebration to start the movement toward equality for all people in the home.
Yes.
In your comments, you mentioned that leadership in this country was lacking at the very top of the executive structure. Do we need to be working from both ends? Is one more important than the other? Or what would you recommend that we do today to begin moving forward again in the area of equality?
Well, I think we need to do both. I think the leadership of this nation sets the moral climate for goodwill and justice to take place. When acts of injustice are performed in segments of the society and the leadership does not raise for us what it ought to be like, silence gives consent. And so it says to other people, well, it's okay for me to express that prejudice and that feeling. So we ought to have the leadership of the nation taking a stand in support of the Constitution that is there. But definitely, training begins in the homes. And what we do there as our children respond to what they see on television and the way we teach them and train them is important. And so we should be doing both.
Bishop Talbert, in introducing you, I did not talk about your long credentials, and you've certainly had your degrees. You have a bachelor's degree from Southern University and a master's in from the Interdenominational Theological Center at Gammon Theological Seminary. And you are a bishop in the United Methodist Church and been so involved in theology and religious work for a long time. And it's I give that background to ask a question concerning theology. It seems to me, as studying the human rights movement and the civil rights movement in the United States, that so many of the great leaders have been religious leaders, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was, and many others in our country that have come out of theology to lead that movement. Locally, we have Father Bill Wasmuth and other religious leaders. But at the same time in this country, we also have some other people in religion who have really been a great hindrance to the civil rights movement from the far right in theology and the new right. Why is there this divisiveness, and why does the very, very conservative right in religion not really see those theological principles that many of us think that the Bible so indicates, obviously, that all persons are created from God?
Right. Listening to you, one would prone to assume that this is something new, and that we haven't had that before. But you see, I grew up when white preachers were talking about heaven and hell, and they would be preaching all of that, and they would talk about the great day in heaven. It's going to be gates of pearl, streets of gold, and all of that. And then they said, even in the colored folks section, they're going to be asphalt streets. So it is new, and people and religious leaders have been using the Bible to prop up their ideologies for a long time. And so The far right is simply a perpetuation of that kind of thinking that has come from before the 1960s, when people, honestly felt that for some reason they were superior to others. And so when you look at the right-wing church today, you have people there who feel that the primary role of the state is to be in defense, and therefore they find themselves hook, line, and sinker in support of what the state stands for. And in this case, most of those leaders are right in with the current administration. You look at it, they follow them not only on that ideology, but when it comes to the issue of war, they differ with the mainline Protestant churches on that. They would say that we ought to be out there doing what we are to fight the communists and that kind of thing. And so you find a consistency in that theology. And of course, I think it's wrong. I think it's a misrepresentation of what the scriptures are saying to us. They tend to be proof texting, taking the scriptures out of context to support their views. I think those of us who would look at the prophetic tradition of the faith and see it through people like Moses and like Jesus, we would recognize that leaders like Martin Luther King, and even though Mahatma Gandhi wouldn't consider himself a Christian, he wasn't, but that he was in the prophetic tradition of the biblical people, where he saw and they saw, those prophets, all people being of importance and of significance and of worth.
Thank you.
Yes.
Janelle Burke.
What do you consider the most effective approaches to bringing about change with regard to people's understanding of civil rights, also with regard to making changes for those people whose position might be affected by civil rights?
Yeah.
What are the most effective ways of making changes, do you think?
I have to begin by admitting to you that I'm biased. I am unapologetically a supporter of the philosophy of nonviolence, the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And so I really believe that the best approach to bringing about change is through nonviolence. And what does that mean? It does, some people believe that nonviolence means a lack of courage. I think it takes more courage to be nonviolent than it does to be, violent in response to what one does to you. For example, if someone hits you, it's very easy for you to hit back. The most difficult thing for you to do is to decide, okay, hit me again. It takes courage to do that. And I think to bring about change, what you need to do is to identify that which you call evil. You also identify the person who is the personification of that evil. Then you allow that person the opportunity and the privilege to change. And public demonstration and response will always be the last resort. And I believe what that calls forth then is the good in all human beings. You look at a person and you'll say, they're terrible. But somehow, if that person is approached and respected as a human being, if and I don't mean letting that person get off the hook when you know that person is doing something evil. You got to confront them at that point. But nevertheless, as you confront them, recognize, in spite of that, I respect you as a person, as a human being. That will do something to change the attitude and the spirit of that person. So I believe then a nonviolent confrontation with persons and with society is the best approach for bringing about change.
Now, talking about, in addition to the nonviolent approach, what are some of the ways that one can work out? You have indicated one way is to approach that person. Mm-hmm. What are other ways that one can go about making change that is in a nonviolent way, such as, for example, education?
Oh yes, oh yeah. I think for the person who sees himself or herself as giving leadership to bringing about change, you have to have a vision and a dream. You have to see the end result of that, and then you have to set up the models that you're going to work on, education and training, developing leadership among people, getting them to take leadership. I think that's what you got to do to work at it. Yeah.
Father Bill.
We saw the first grade kids from Saltese, and
Yes.
they were delightful. And as I alluded to in my remarks, that I'd been to Winton Elementary School on Friday and saw those young people working with the whole issue of human rights, civil rights as well. And we both supported those young people today very much. Would you have any words of encouragement or advice to the educational system of young people on what needs to be done there, or how best to go about that? It's just making a little bit more concrete the thing that Janelle just talked about.
I think the Martin Luther King holiday provides the educational system of this nation with a tremendous opportunity to teach and to share with all of the young people of this nation some of the great contributions made by Martin Luther King for all of us in the society. For instance, the greatest friend white America had when Martin Luther King was alive was Martin Luther King, because he wouldn't allow any of his leaders to take up arms against the white people who were dominating the society and the people who were fostering and perpetuating segregation and discrimination and oppression. And that's something for us to teach our young people, is to say, you know, the best approach to life is not to take up weapons, but to fight it with love. And that needs to be taught through our school system. And I think that holiday provides that opportunity for us.
Steve Sheen.
It's interesting for me to think back to a year ago when Julian Bond was the keynote speaker at our first Martin Luther King Day celebration, and he told the audience, and for me it was I think it was sort of a jolting revelation that we have become complacent, that the civil rights movement, the progress toward racial equality in this country has slowed or maybe even completely stopped. And you in your remarks today suggest that maybe we're even backsliding a little bit now. Do we need another charismatic black leader like Martin Luther King to focus public attention on that problem? Is that what it's going to take to get forward progress started again?
That's a good question, and I do agree that we are in a complacent state. I think there's apathy, but I'm not sure that another king is what we need. I'm not sure that that's possible. I think what we need are a lot of Bill Wassmans, people in the various communities throughout this nation who have been captivated by that dream, who will take the opportunity and the privilege to make it live in the midst of those real human situations. And I think if people give that some attention, and if people in the other Coeur d'Alenes, for instance, throughout this nation, were to address issues as forcibly as the Kootenai County Human Relations Committee is addressing those issues here, we would see some significant changes taking place in that field throughout the country. So my response to that is, no, not another single entity like Martin Luther King, but several. And that would be wherever the issues are, people would rise up and declare equality and justice for all, whatever that issue might be.
I have a question for you that I've asked so many times. I've worried about this so much, and I've heard the answers over and over, but I want to give you the opportunity to say this to our audience again. It defies theology, it defies all moral values to hate a class or group of people because of their race or their color or their religion and so forth. In my viewpoint, the concepts of rationality defy that kind of attitude. But it still, as you've indicated, is there. What makes an individual or a group of individuals come together and to teach hatred and prejudice, and obviously from a very emotional basis and very determined? Because it fits no principles of ethics and values of morality. Why do they do it?
Yeah. Well, in the mainline churches today, we don't talk about it very much. But you ever heard about the word sin? You know, we forget that as human beings, we're sinful. And we need to know and experience the saving grace of God in our lives. And so what happens is we are selfish. We are guilty of being proud. That's pride. And when we aren't challenged theologically to address that sin within ourselves, it can bring us to precisely that point. And I think that's what we are suffering from. We're suffering from and we are guilty of sin. We are violating the very basis of why we were created and in whose image we were created. We're created in the image of God, but we are violating that and going against it when we practice in the ways that you're talking about.
Thank you. Janelle Berg.
Among the priorities for change in the whole area of civil rights, what would your 2, 3, or 4 most pressing issues be? You've alluded somewhat in the answers to other questions to what you consider to be pressing matters in the area, but what would you consider the 2, 3, or 4 highest priorities that we as people who are interested in civil rights could be working toward?
Well, obviously, we need to make sure that the laws that are on the books are enforced and people are the recipients of the protection of those laws. But in addition to that, I think we need to work hard to make sure that persons are educated. We need to make sure that children, for instance, are properly educated. It's too late once they get beyond elementary school. I think we need to make sure that children in every segment of our society is properly trained and educated so that they will have a chance to develop their skills and their potentials as human beings. And so as persons who are concerned about that tremendous potential that is there resident in human beings, we ought to be investing more in education rather than investing less. And then the next thing is to make sure that once people are educated and trained, they have something to do, that they can put that to work somewhere. Adequate jobs for people to use their skills for the good of society.
What role do you think economics play in the whole issue of civil rights?
When I talk about equality and justice, I'm talking about economic justice and social justice, and that goes hand in hand. You know, you can talk justice and equality all you want, but if you don't see that in terms of dollars, there isn't equality. So it plays a significant role. So it means that people need to be paid for what they are worth, and that needs to be done irrespective of race, irrespective of sex.
Do you believe there's a backsliding when people become more aware of economics, that sometimes there's an attempt to hold civil rights progress down because of economic issues?
Throughout the history of this nation, we've seen the civil rights issues set aside whenever there's an economic crunch. You know, it seems to go well as long as there are some opportunities for growth. But when things get tight, we easily set that aside, and so that's nothing new. And so when things get tight, that's one of the things that you can just set aside and deal with what is more pressing matter. For instance, that's why I think the current administration can get away with taking the back seat on civil rights and on affirmative action, because people do appreciate the fact that something is being done with the economic situation. And so the choice is made. If we have to sacrifice one, we'll sacrifice civil rights. That's what the masses are saying. But that doesn't make it right.
Father Bill.
Churches should stay within church walls, and church people should stay within church walls and stay out of the marketplace of economics and social action and peace and war and all those questions. You know, you've heard that, I've heard that. Do you have some response to that?
Well,
we're not very good examples of it, by the way.
Well, those who would say that, they don't understand what the church is. I think when we look at Jesus, we would realize that the church is not isolated from any issue that confronts human beings. When you look at the role of the prophets throughout the Old Testament, you will recognize the prophets are not those people who simply stand in the pulpit and pontificate. But as Father Herschel would have said, a prophet is one who is emboldened by the Spirit, one who finds himself or herself in the midst of the struggle of human beings in society, and in the midst of that struggle dares to speak a word for God. And from my perspective, that's where the church has to be. And if it's in a place other than that, from my perspective, it is not bearing a true witness to the Church of Jesus Christ. And so I would say the people who use that they are a part of the status quo. And when the status quo is being challenged, they will do anything they can to stop that challenge. And so you come to the church and say, you stick with religious things and let us handle the political thing. That's because we like it the way it is.
Steve Sheen.
If I could return to an economic question for just a second. In your remarks this morning, you had a word for it. It had something to do with compensatory legislation. I know it, and I think most people are familiar with what's called the quota system. And you talk about stumbling blocks to racial equality. I think that's one of them. There are a great many people who are willing on philosophical grounds to accept the equality of people. When you start talking about establishing quotas that would mandate minority positions in certain public hiring situations, they stop short there. I thought you had an excellent explanation for that. Maybe you could share that with us here.
Yeah, what I was suggesting, that it's one thing to have legislation saying that all people are equal, but it's another thing when you start dealing historically with the reality of the situation. And as Martin Luther King talked about that, his experience with India, and talking about one person starting 300 years ago toward a goal and another one starting now. If you put those two in the race and say now, keep running and you know who's going to get there first. Well, the woman started 300 years late will never catch up. So the only way that you're going to do that is to give the one that was late getting in the race, and was late getting in the race not because his or her decision, but was late getting in the race because of preferential treatment given the one who got in the race. You hear what I'm saying? Because of race. Well, now that's got to be reversed so that the one who was kept out by that preferential treatment will now be put in the race and put in at a point where that person will have a chance to run a competitive race. And that's what I meant by compensatory responses to what has happened to people of color and to women in this country over the years. And so what that means is in the field of education, in the fields of employment, you cannot expect women and minorities to be in as long as the whites have been and then finally get recognized, because whites still continue to have that continuing historical length, And so you got to look at potential and reward that and put them in and give them a chance, and then they will have a chance to prove themselves.
Bishop Talbert, on behalf of the panel and all of our staff, we want to thank you for being on campus today and speaking to almost 1,200 people, and then doing this program. We taped this on January the 19th. The time it airs, Dr. King Day will have passed, but it has been inspiring, and we thank you, and we want to welcome you back in the future to continue to assist us in this movement for human rights.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm just delighted to be in Coeur d'Alene, specifically for what recognition you've received recently for your actions.
Thank you. Our guest has been Bishop Melvin Talbert of the United Methodist Church, speaking of Dr. King and human rights. Please be with us again next week this same time. I am Tony Stewart.
North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at the same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by an NIC student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.